Hi, my name is Jaxon Jensen. I'm going to be reporting today on Chapter 12, which is about the Vietnam War and the role that the media played, specifically television, and the role that they played during the Vietnam War. So, to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Vietnam War. The war officially began in 1965, but the United States had their hands in the war or in Vietnam a little bit starting in the early 1950s. In 1954, the country of Vietnam was split into half. The northern part of Vietnam was for the communists, and that's where the Communist Party was located. And the southern part of Vietnam was the pro-democracy party, and that's where they were located. And this time period, President Eisenhower dispatched many military advisors to go to South Vietnam to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. In 1964 and 1965, there were a lot of bombings that happened from both sides, North Vietnam and the United States, which really intensified the conflict. And in 1965, by the end of that year, there were over 175,000 American troops on the ground. And by the time that 1967 ended, there were over 500,000 troops on the ground. And by the end of the war, over 58,000 Americans had lost their lives. Now, in 1965, that's really when TV networks really got involved in the war, and started with CBS reporter Morley Safer. He joined a crew of troops, a group of troops, and they went into a village and eventually burned the whole village down. This was shown on TV, and there was a lot of outrage in the United States over that, including by President Johnson at the time. And people were really upset, and they thought that this portrayed the U.S. soldiers, as it says in the textbook, as heartless killers. There was also the 1968 Tet Offensive, which was dubbed America's first TV super battle. Programs and the TV networks portrayed this as a brutal bloodbath, as it says in the text, with lengthy footage that was unmatched in its sheer volume of gore and carnage. They also showed a lot of gun battles of the North Vietnamese and the United States soldiers. And one other major moment from the textbook was when the young soldier from North Vietnam was brutally murdered at point blank range, and they showed that on network news as well. And this really made the American people question the war and why they were there in the first place. My personal response from this and all this, after reading the chapter, I really was impressed with how the media handled the whole situation. With this being the first time ever that a war was nationally televised, I thought the media did a pretty good job going by kind of by the seat of their pants, learning how to do things, and after not really having an example at all. One connection that I did think of, though, was from earlier in the textbook, was the Spanish-American War. In that war, they used the print media, and there were a lot of false statements given there. And with the Vietnam War, they could use the print media, but the TV networks were able to show evidence of what was printed to show that things actually happened and that they weren't lies. A couple of ethical tensions that were mentioned in the textbook. First, there were some ethics that were lacked in covering both sides of the war. The textbook mentions that the news media only showed things like violence and carnage instead of showing things like the political side and the strategical side of the war. And this was repeatedly ignored, and not much attention was given to that. Also, another ethical question was, or an argument that was made, was during the Tet Offensive, how the media had kind of lied about what happened. They said that the Vietnamese had won the offensive, but in reality, after indisputable evidence had been given and shown, that the offensive was actually not effective and that the U.S. had won that. And instead of the news companies, the TV companies coming out and saying that they had made a mistake, they never really addressed the situation anymore to set the record straight. A contemporary link that I found was pretty interesting is from the BBC, and it is their thoughts and guidelines on journalism ethics when it comes to conflict, coverage of a conflict. And one of the main points that they have, they require all their reporters to say if reports are censored or monitored, also, or if they're withholding information, and why they're doing this. Another thing that they are required to do is their footage must contain clear editorial justification for the use of very graphic pictures of war or atrocity. So this kind of helps to save families from heartache, maybe seeing a family member lose a leg on TV, or seeing a family member die in war. And so if they're censoring those types of things, then there won't be a problem with that. And in closing, just a couple of questions that I have for the class. First, what was it ethical for the media to not only show, but to go out of their way to find Americans in Vietnam who were wounded or in pain, and to show that on a nightly basis? And also another question is, what would it be ethical for the news media to do a similar thing today? And if they did, do you think it would have a similar effect that it did during the same time of the Vietnam War?